Hello AP US History students and welcome to another edition of AP Daily Knockoff. My name is Ryan Koo and I am a San Marino High School 11th grader currently enrolled in Mr. Peter Picconi's AP US History course. San Marino High School is a small, nationally acclaimed 9th to 12th grade public school located just a few miles from downtown Los Angeles. In today's video, we will explore AP US History Topic 3.3, Taxation Without Representation. But what you're probably asking, what we need to know specifically about this topic? Well, we can find the answer to that question in College Board's AP US History Course and Exam Description Learning Objective. There it says that you will need to and be able to explain how British colonial policies regarding North America led to the Revolutionary War. But before beginning my presentation on topic 3.3, I want to take a second and describe how I plan to proceed in today's video. First, I'm going to describe in one sentence the slogan "No taxation without representation." Next, I'm going to cover a bit of background information related to the slogan, focusing primarily on the factors and events leading up to it. Subsequently, I'll describe the slogan in detail and then, before closing out, offer up a few short-term and long-term effects of its usage. So what is taxation without representation? It is a political slogan adopted by American patriots between the years 1700 and 1754 that expressed one of the primary grievances of the American colonists against Great Britain. Way back when Britain established the first permanent English settlement in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, trading between Jamestown and its mother country via the Columbian Exchange brought England raw goods and resources. Soon after, various other English colonies and villages sprung up in British North America. As the colonies of British North America were relatively new and underdeveloped, the British adopted a policy of salutary neglect, whose aim was to give these colonies time to grow and prosper, free from British taxes and subjugations. The cost of enforcing tax code, exponentiated by the distance between Britain and her colonies, also contributed to the lack of enforcement of trade laws in the American colonies. But then, after the French and Indian War, a 7-year-long conflict between the French and the British found themselves in heavy debt due to the cost of the war. In order to offset the cost accrued, the British turned to taxing the colonies, ending the period of salutary neglect. But this wasn't the first time Britain imposed taxes upon the colonies, as there were several taxes placed on the colonies before, such as the Molasses Act in 1733. Many colonists didn't take these taxes seriously, nor were they heavily regulated by the British government. However, Britain imposed stricter control on the American colonies after the French and Indian War, heavily regulating trade routes and scrutinizing the collection of taxes. The British even went as far as punishing the colonists who tried to evade these taxes. And now that we've looked at the factors leading up to the first major use of the slogan, "No taxation without representation," let's turn our attention to the slogan itself. To pay for not only the war debt incurred during the French and Indian War, but also the cost of stationing British soldiers along the American frontier to protect colonists from the Potomac Indians, Britain passed several tax acts that were expected to be paid for by the colonists. These acts included the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Acts of 1767, and the Tea Acts of 1773. The colonists were more annoyed by the Sugar Act, the Townshend Act, and the Tea Act than they were angry, as they thought that although these taxes were unfair, the British had the right to taxation as these taxes were import taxes. However, the Stamp Act, a tax that required all papers produced within the colony to have a stamp on them, really angered the colonists as it was essentially an internal act of taxation. The Stamp Act drove the colonists to adopt the slogan "No taxation without representation," as the colonists felt that without colonial representation to Parliament, Britain had no right to tax them internally. So why did the colonists raise such exclamatory objections to these laws? It was not because the colonists couldn't afford to pay them or reluctant to pay them, but it was rather the fact that they were taxed without being represented in Parliament. The English Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, and British legislation all grant Englishmen the right to be represented when taxed. As colonists still saw themselves as royal British subjects, they felt that they were entitled to these rights and thus deserved physical representation in Parliament. Now, to answer our million-dollar question, you can see now why the colonists adopted the slogan, "No taxation without representation," after the passage of the Stamp Act. The British, on the other hand, completely disagreed with this line of reasoning. They argued that the colonists are essentially virtually represented in Parliament, which means that Parliament had the power to legislate on behalf of the colonists without physical representation. This difference in opinion generated a manifested feeling in many colonists who thought that their rights as Englishmen were being stripped away. This response, as we will see, contributed to noisy and destructive protests in the short scheme of things and was part of the ignition that ultimately sparked the American Revolution in the long run. In the short term, colonists aggressively and defiantly protested the passage and implementation of such taxes. Colonists resorted to boycotting and destroying British goods, smuggling illegal goods from other countries, and openly protesting the passage of these tax acts. These shared grievances also began to unify the previously unaligned 13 colonies, and as Mr. Bill Pulaski, an AP US history teacher who just happened to be the person that made the actual College Board Daily video on topic 3.3, put it, the formation of an intercolonial common cause. The Boston Tea Party of 1773 is a well-known example of such destructive protests. When 3 British tea ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, arrived in Boston Harbor on the night of December 16th, the colonists refused to accept and purchase the tea and immediately demanded that the tea be returned to England after Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused. Patriot leader Samuel Adams organized a Tea Party with about 60 members of the Sons of Liberty, his underground resistance group. The Sons of Liberty, among many other patriots, dumped 342 chests of tea, valued at some $18,000 back then, into the Boston Harbor. On rare occasions, colonists are also known to take their frustration with the British government out on tax collectors, tarring and feathering them. One notorious and brutal account of a tarred and feathered tax collector was that of John Malcolms, a British loyalist who was pulled out of his house, stripped naked in a cold January afternoon, tarred, feathered, pulled into a modern jacket, and tied up and paraded around the city of Boston for several long hours. The angry mob eventually let Malcolm go after he publicly cursed Royal Governor Hutchinson, surviving the ordeal but not without some serious injuries. In the long term, the colonists finally decided that the infringement on their rights as Englishmen were too much, leading to an overtly shared consensus that the colonists needed to fight back for their freedom, ultimately leading to the American Revolutionary War and other large-scale sentiments for an American independence. The slogan "No taxation without representation" also inspired colonial patriotism for their newly established country, the USA, after the initial calls for independence. This is evident in the diverse participation of individuals behind this movement as patriots of all sorts, not just men who supported the cause of revolution, contributed their part. This included artisans, groups such as the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, housewives, and female advocates such as Abigail Adams, Betsy Ross, and Mercy Otis Warren. The slogan "No taxation without representation" further inspired Thomas Paine's Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence, key contributors to the cause for independence after the movement. And now, you are fully prepared to explain how British colonial policies regarding North America led to the Revolutionary War. And with that said, today's episode of AP Daily Knockoff comes to an end. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching, best of luck on this year's exam, and stay healthy. This is Ryan Koo, wishing you all a great Titan day, and now signing off.